Welcome to today's training. Today's training is what is the pelvic floor and what does it do? And the reason why I'm doing this training is because we should know we are so disconnected with this part of our body because it's hidden, essentially. And in order to know if something is potentially going on down there, you have to be actually aware of what it is and what it does to know what it shouldn't be doing. What I want you to get out of this by the end of the training, you should be able to have an idea of the basic anatomy of the pelvic floor, and you should be able to recall the main functions of the pelvic floor. Before I get all technical on you and the presentation becomes a little boring, let me just give you the normal people language of what these parts are. So we've got the lips. The lips are here, and then the lips that the labia majora lips are not shown here. The taint, you guys, is here. This is the area between the back door and the front door. The clit is here, the yellow thing. And the clit, or the clitoris, is covered by a hood. It's like a sweatshirt hood. That's that. Now on to the function of all this. So what you see on the outside, basically, it's all normal no matter what it looks like, or I hate to use the word normal, but what you see on the outside is to enable your arousal to turn into a mini boner, but with your clitoris. So these muscles on the outside here, they're to help you achieve a mini boner. Their job is to anchor the clitoris against the pelvic bones. The clitoris is huge, not just this little thing, but you can't see it in here. This hole keeps poop and gas from passing in, and it's also passing. This hole is the hole that we know as the vaginal canal, and that also is for many utilities, as we all know as women. And then this hole is for pee to come out of. Now on to the more technical language. When I'm talking about the pelvic floor, I'm talking about the muscle tissues, the ligaments, the nerves, the vessels, everything that flows through the pelvic floor. But the focus of this training is mainly on the connective tissue and muscles. And I'll mention some of the others, but it's not the focus. So there's 5 main functions of the pelvic floor. Number 1 is support of the pelvic organs, support of the spine, supportive of, I already said the organs. Second function, sphincteric. What does that mean? So we have muscles, circular muscles in our body that close off an opening. That's a sphincter. So it serves as a sphincteric function, both from the urethra and where the pee comes out, and then the anus where poop comes out. Third function is sexual function. Fourth function is stability. So the pelvic floor, along with other areas of the deep core, stabilize the pelvis and the spine as your legs and your arms move. Last but not least, the 5th function is called, it's a sump pump. Another words for that is it moves fluid from the pelvis and legs back to the heart. So if you haven't had an orgasm, or you're really aroused and the orgasm doesn't happen, women's version of blue balls is blue vulva. But that can happen because of a lot of stretching that happened during a vaginal delivery. It's not just that, and then other things. So those are the 5 main function of the pelvic floor. Now, a different portion of the pelvic floor, which I'm going to get into in a moment, the outer layer, has other functions. One is to maintain clitoral erection. So that's a stability function that I mentioned before. And then also closing off the urethra and the vagina. So that is the sphincteric function. Now let's dive into different layers of the pelvic floor. So we separate this into two things, deep and superficial. So I have my model to go over this, and we're going to talk about superficial. What that means is the layers that are on the outside. Our pelvic floor is separated into three main layers. Layer one is where the perineum, or the space between the vagina and the rectum, lie. This area, the perineum, is basically the passageway to your reproductive organs, your urinary tract, and your GI tract. This is also where, when we're talking about perineum, vulva, so let's talk vulva. A lot of the tissues or the structures that you could see on the outside, or the vulva here, include layer one structures. So vulvar anatomy, we have what you can't see is the labia majora. And yeah, so the labia majora, the outer lips of the vulva, are not shown here. But if you could see these tissues here, that's the labia minora. This here, the yellow structure, is the clitoris, and it's covered by the clitoral hood on top. Here is the urethra, or the tube where urine flows out of. Here, this opening is the vaginal opening, or the introitus. And that is covered when we're younger by the hymen. And then this here, that is considered the hymenal plane. And that's used whenever your providers are looking for prolapse. If you have an inflammatory process, you might see a couple glands. We have the main glands, or the vestibular glands, but otherwise you can't really see those. Up here is the pubic bone, and that's considered part of the vulva. And I believe I hit everything from that. So I just want to highlight, though, the clitoris. What you see on the clitoris, this portion, is so small. So the clitoris is actually huge, and it branches into like two sets of arms. So one arm and then another arm on either side that are deep in the front part of the vagina. So just so you know, this is just where it starts, okay? Nerves wise, we have, this doesn't show the nerves, but you have a nerve that gives you sensation around the clitoris. That's called the dorsal nerve of the clitoris. You have the perineal branch of the pudendal nerve, and I think the dorsal nerve of the clitoris might be a branch of that. But the perineal branch that gives you sensation here, and then you have the inferior rectal branch of the pudendal nerve that gives you sensation around the back door. When I say front half of the perineum, I'm talking about the urogenital triangle. So you could see that this is a pretty good triangle. The back half is the rectogenital triangle, and that's kind of like a triangle as well. Layer one also includes this muscle here. It's called the external anal sphincter, and it's circular. This muscle attaches to the muscle called the perineal body. So the perineal body is a thick, dense muscle that have a lot of other muscles that attach to it. So as a recap, superficial layer one has nerves and muscles, and then also vessels, glands. We're focusing on the muscles here. I haven't gone over most of them yet, except the external anal sphincter and the perineal body. I introduced you to the labia majora, which you can't see. Labia minora is right here. Vaginal opening is here. Hymenal plane, clitoris, a portion of the clitoris, covered by the hood, urethra, pubic bone up here, and I already said labia minora. Just so you guys know, there is a ton of variability. You can have big labia majora, small labia majora. bigger labia minora, smaller labia minora. Every vulva is unique and every vulva is beautiful. So just remember that. Let's go into now the muscles of layer 1. So layer 1 muscles serve primarily as the sexual function and stability function. Right here, so if we're, let's say I'm a cave. This is a cave. Let's say my head is the vaginal opening. Underneath the walls of the cave, which is here, the cave, my walls, is the ischiocavernosus muscle. Here's the vaginal opening. Two muscles around there. Here are the bulbocavernosus muscles. So both of these muscles serve to maintain the clitoris in an erected position, so an aroused position. Basically, if you've ever seen a hard penis, your clitoris gets hard. And the ability to do that requires these muscles that I just described to be able to maintain that. I can test these on the outside, but I also can test them internally. And what I would do is I would insert a gloved finger up to about first knuckle. So that is layer 1. Don't forget the external anal sphincter there as well, so the back door. Layer 2, you guys, this is a very thick fibrous layer. It's called the perineal membrane. This is where a lot of issues can arise, like nerve compression. This is where I do a lot of manual therapy because of the scar tissue that just catches on there. And if we're talking internal assessment, I am inserting my finger just past my first knuckle, between my first and second knuckle typically, sometimes up to the second knuckle. You have muscles there, one muscle in particular called the deep transverse perineum. It reminds me that I forgot to tell you about this muscle here. This is the superficial transverse perineum. That's part of layer 1. It attaches onto the perineal body here. The deep one is just below that, and it's a little thicker than the superficial. And that area is typically where people have problems and that are in overactive or in spasm, and a lot of people that I see. This fibrotic layer can also disrupt other nerves, like the obturator nerve. So if you have like aching in your hip that goes down your leg, that could be part of it. And then some other nerves that I'm not going to get into today. Layer 2 also has the squeeze muscle. So when you hear the term stop the flow of urine, they're talking about the superficial urogenital triangle muscles, which is 3 muscles. You have one that goes like this around the urethra, like this. You have one that squeezes like this, and then you have one that goes around the vaginal opening and the urethra. Those together, when you contract them, push the urethra against the pubic bone. So when people have slings, it's often because these muscles are insufficient, and that could be because of direct injury to the muscles, or it's typically, though, the stability, the other structures that help stabilize these muscles and just the whole area as well. And that is really complicated. It took me a couple years to get it. So I'm not going to try to explain that, the ATFP right now and all of that other stuff. Layer 2, anything else? I think that's the main stuff about layer 2. It's really not well represented here, so it's hard to show. Layer 3 is the deep pelvic floor. So I just described the superficial pelvic floor. The deep pelvic floor is that area that I consider is part of the deep core. This is where the levator ani resides. So that is, as a group, the pelvic floor muscles. We have mainly, it depends how you break them down. And I'm going to mention the terms because I know some of you are physical therapists that should know this. And some of you are trainers that you should know this as well. But honestly, it's complicated, and If you don't, it's fine. But know that levator ani is a group, and then we have them even into smaller subsets. We have the pubococcygeus, which is broken into the pubovaginalis and the puborectalis. And then you have the iliococcygeus and the coccygeus, which isn't truly part of the pelvic floor. We also have the obturator internus, which isn't part of the pelvic floor. So from the inside here, and then from the outside, the muscles that are closest, that are most narrow, that attach to the inside of the pubic bone underneath, are the puborectalis and the pubovaginalis. So the pubovaginalis helps close the vagina. So if you've ever started your period and you didn't have a tampon, you're squeezing and blood doesn't actually come out, you might be using that muscle. The puborectalis, or the pubococcygeus as a group, help keep the kink off the rectum. The puborectalis itself particularly kinks off the rectum. The puborectalis also attaches to the external anal sphincter and the perineal body. So they're very, very related there. Now, when I am testing your muscles, I am going to check first how tight you squeeze around my finger, and then if there's a lift. When I'm testing squeeze pressure and all other things are cleared, don't worry about those things, I am really checking for puborectalis. If you have weak squeeze pressure, I almost always suggest a pelvic floor exam through the back door. So I talked about pubococcygeus, which is broken into two. Let's talk about iliococcygeus. Iliococcygeus is more on the outside here. So like right in here, rather than more narrow. And this is our main lifter. So whenever I say later on in other videos, I want you to squeeze around the bean and then lift the beans inward, the lifters are the iliococcygeus. Without these muscles intact, it's really hard to get a lifting function. Then the coccygeus muscle is the one that attaches to the tailbone here, and then another portion of the bone, and goes out to the side and attaches to another bony landmark called the ischial spine. These muscles flex the coccyx, or your tailbones. When I say flex, it does this, or bends the tailbone side to side if it's one-sided dominant or one side overactive. These muscles do not lift the pelvic organs like the levator ani do. And often people cheat with these muscles and they're not using their pelvic floor. And one way to check is to directly put your hand on them, or see if there's a lift at all. Let's see, obturator internus. So what you see in this window here is the obturator internus. It's a hip muscle, and it basically, it's like a boomerang shape. It attaches to the hip. It goes like, it makes like a 90-degree angle, and it helps turn the hip out. It attaches to a very fibrous structure that supports the pelvic floor. So when, especially the iliococcygeus, so when the obturator internus is not functioning well, then the iliococcygeus often isn't functioning well either. It can be overactive, it can be underactive, it can be anywhere between, or vice versa. So I went over the layer 1, layer 2, or the superficial pelvic floor. I went over layer 3, the deep pelvic floor. I talked briefly about some of the nerves, the dorsal nerve of the clitoris, the perineal branch of the pudendal nerve, and the inferior rectal nerve of the pudendal nerve. We have the pudendal nerve that crosses a lot of different points deep as well, one being in this canal here. So if I'm internal and I'm trying to find the obturator internus, I want to be careful, because as I do that, I can get into part of where that nerve comes out, and some people complain of a zinger or a shock. And then also whenever I'm on the outside, I can get it right on the inside of the ischial tuberosity, which are called your sit bones here. So sit bones, pubic bone. This is you laying on your back. I'm seeing you from the front. This is if I give you your vulva back. And this is if you're standing up. Where I am for time. Okay, so talked about blood supply, how we can get blue vulva or pelvic congestion. I talked about the muscles, and I talked about some of the nerves. I think this is a good primer so that when you get to the videos where I am walking you through that process, you don't have to, we're not going over what every muscle does other than, okay, you're going to squeeze here, you should feel it here. You're already aware of that and you already have the guide. If you have any questions, I'd like you to put them in the comments. If you're on Facebook, comment. If you're on the course, you can comment directly on the course. And then I will see you on the next video.